That's the way to Bristol, that's the way to London. Behind me, about 10 miles away, is Oxford. And right here is where the old Didcot to Southampton line used to run. And there, behind me, is where Didcot Station used to stand. In the latest rebuild during the 1980s, British Rail renamed it Didcot Parkway. I don't know why. This is how Didcot Station looked in 1852, 8 years after it had opened, by which time it had become a busy junction on the Great Western Main Line from Bristol to London's Paddington. From here, you could catch the Exeter Flyer, which would take you the 53 miles to London in 55 minutes. Today, the same journey by high-speed train will take you 45 minutes. 10 minutes less. The name has changed, the buildings have gone, the trains are different, but the spirit does live on. Over there, at the Didcot Railway Centre, home of the Great Western Society.
You mention Didcot to anybody who has had interest throughout the world in railways, and they know of us, and along with the power station behind us, we're the two big attractions in the area.
Now celebrating 20 years at Didcot, the Great Western Society has flourished, and since those first faltering steps, has now become one of the largest preservation societies in the world.
The origins of the Great Western Society go back to 1960, when British Railways published a list of locomotives that they were going to preserve as part of what is now known as the National Collection. And myself and some colleagues of mine who in those days were schoolboy train spotters, who used to watch the trains go by at Southall, decided that it would be a good idea if we could buy a 1400 class auto train locomotive and auto coach, because we felt that that was a gap in the collection that had been announced as being preserved. Not really knowing very much about it, we thought, well, all we have to do was write a letter to the railway press and the money would come pouring in. I think probably as 17-year-old schoolboys we didn't really recognise the full ramifications of what we were letting ourselves in for. We found after a few years that there was a lot more interest. We had other people come on and we launched other funds for other locomotives. Certain other locomotives were bought privately by individual members. And in fact, locomotive 6998 Bert Magnus Hall was also one of our very early locomotives and was brought out of traffic from Oxford Shed having hauled the last steam-hauled train on the western region of British Railways, and that was delivered down to Totnes, which in those days was our base. We found that the interests of the businessmen in Devon were not necessarily the same as our interests, and we were offered an opportunity to move our rolling stock up from Devon into Didcot Engine Shed in 1967. And we brought up the stock from Devon, the locomotives and 2 or 3 coaches that we had down there. We also had a locomotive and some coaches at Taplow just down the line, and they were brought here as well. And that was 20 years ago, was the beginnings of our occupation of Didcot Railway Centre.
In the last week of March 1987, visitors flocked to Didcot, the headquarters and showground of the Great Western Society, a mecca for the Society's 5,000 members worldwide. Despite the drizzle, the fires burnt furiously in all of the Society's 10 engines steaming that week, and over 100 members volunteered to run stalls, cater, administer, and manage the toing and froing of the celebration week. Whilst never far away, the work of restoration progressed.
Well, it was before we came to Didcot, when we used to have a little depot in the goods shed at Taplow. It's the old goods shed there, look. And we were in process of moving all the stock and everything, what we had at the time, down to Didcot.
2 coaches?
Not much. We were shoveling on coal for the special to run down the line to Didcot. So. And this is the 61 loco. And there's the stock we had then, consisting of about 2 coaches, plus a van we hired from BR to put all their sundry bits and pieces in. And that was about it.
It was built in 1931, I think. Society bought it in 1965 from British Railways, and it's been here. First it went to Taplow, and then in 1967 it came to Didcot. It was the first Society engine at Didcot, and it's been here since then. It was in service until about 1975, and we've been rebuilding it since then.
The livery this is carrying at the moment is the livery it would have had between 1944 and 49, and that's the nearest we can get to it in Great Western liveries, because they added various bits and pieces as the engine got older. It's all hand painted, marked out in chalk first and then painted on in enamel. The only transfers we use are the Great Western coats of arms, but all the lettering and numbering is all done by hand. Well, my trade is a draftsman during the week, so at weekends I'm the maintenance foreman here, and when they need an engine lettering, there's a couple of us that do it as and when. But obviously, it's not needed that often because we only finish an engine probably once every 2 years.
Highlights of the week were the mass steamings, where the engines gathered to hiss and boil in front of the engine sheds, to the delight of the enthusiasts.
This loco, 5051 Bristol Castle, was run on the mainline expresses, hauling passengers down to the south. It mainly worked in the Welsh area, where it stayed for quite a long time. It was then renamed from Bristol Castle to Earl Bathurst, and then it was scrapped and taken to Dye Woodham scrapyard, where it was bought by the Miners family, who were very large and quite rich. And then recently Mr. Miner died, and the family was therefore forced to sell the locos. And the society launched a campaign, Castle Aid, and we're raising the money to bring the loco, make sure it stays here. It has been recorded unofficially that they reached about 100 mile an hour, but they could maintain speeds of up to 80 mile an hour without any trouble at all, apart from the sort of fireman collapsing every now and then in between throwing coal into the fire.
Well, actually it goes back quite a long way. It goes back to Longmore, to the days of the military railway there. There's a chap brought in a small 040 saddle tank there, and my colleague John has just gone down the way. We saw this locomotive and we thought, well, we could do this kind of thing as well with a small loco. So we had a look round and we happened to find that this locomotive was derelict at Southampton. So we bought it in 1968 and brought it onto this depot in 1969. And it's been here ever since. We hadn't taken it out of the depot at all. We've pulled some real heavy trains, including Blue Peter we've pulled with that locomotive in this depot.
The shunting yard, which is now a mass of steam traffic, was abandoned by British Rail in the late 1960s. The Society have renovated and relaid much of the track and sidings in use today. Two of the lines are long enough to offer short trips, a chance for the visitor to experience the elegance and style of the Great Western Railway.
Built in 1936, it was originally numbered 4866. It was renumbered in 1948, I think. The engine was mainly shedded down in the Newton Abbot area. Normally worked on either the Brixton branch or was the spare for the Ashburton branch. But it was first engine bought by the Society back in 1964. Since then it's had two overhauls, the last one about 5 years ago. The last rebuild, it had all the rear end of the frames rebuilt totally, where the trailing wheels are, and the whole engine was stripped right down. Had a full boiler repair, mechanical overhaul. It's got about another 3 or 4 years to do before it's due for the next overhaul. Normally has casual repairs over most winters.
Preservation doesn't just stop at engines and carriages. The Society has saved a whole station. It's true. Painstaking rebuilding has given Didcot's engines a charming halt.
This Didcot, well, we reconstructed this. The waiting room, as you see, that came off the Lambourne branch. It's what they call a pagoda-type waiting room. That came from the Lambourne branch. Signal box from Radstock. The water tower, which you see down there, that is authentic. And the whole thing was reconstructed to be a branch halt in the 1930s, 20s, 30s. We took a prize for it because it's as authentic as really as things were, and it lets people see what a branch halt looked like in the 30s. Something you don't see today, of course. They've all gone, unfortunately. We're quite proud of it, very proud of it.
And every well-managed station needs a signal box. And every signal box, a level crossing.
Mind the gates, please.
Both can be found at Didcot, renovated to their former working glory, run and maintained by a specialist signalling group of the Society. It's difficult to believe, but this is how the Radstock box looked on its arrival at Didcot. This box, from Frome in Somerset, will soon be fully operational, and then interlocked into the system.
Well, he used to work from the mid-30s right up to the end of steam on branch lines. And the idea of it was that you could drive from the engine, and when you got to the end of the branch line, you didn't need to turn anything round. just got out the cab that end and come up this end and you could drive from this end. With this one, if I put too much brake application in, the train just comes to a stop because I can't recreate the vacuum. The fireman has to do that. So you've got to work as a team, though you're the length of a coach apart, and because otherwise we should just stop, short of the platform. I used to work up to a maximum of 4 coaches, but they'd only have the maximum of 2 behind the engine, which was worked off the regulator rod, because so if you had more than 2 coaches, the driver just could not pull it across. So if you have 4, you'd have 2 coaches at the front, then the engine, and then another 2 coaches. It was to make it a lot easier, otherwise you could never move this regulator handle otherwise. The only thing is the fireman has to use the reversing gear for you, and you do that by whistle codes, but it's quite simple. This is a whistle chain. You've just got the net in there. So I always take it back the other way now. Whistle.
The Society is now in the process of renovating a second auto coach, thus giving them the unique honour of operating 2 of these eccentric but eminently practical pieces of railway history.
All he's got control of is applying the brake and opening the regulator. So he can put the brake on, but he can't take it off. So I've got to do that from there. It's roughly knowing where you watch the needles, the vacuum gauges in the cab, and see where he's making his brake application. You know where he's going to take it off. So you take it off for him. It's not completely automatic, it's about as near as auto as you can get.
Yeah.
Certainly as far as the Great Western was concerned.
I started off as a fireman at Fairford, and a cleaner of it, really. Then went to fireman and stayed there until 1962 when the line closed. Then sort of, the end of steam was near enough that, and that was I thought there's never, have a chance of getting on a steam engine again. And one day somebody just said, "Oh, you want to go down Didcot? They got a society down there," and I thought, well, it's not really sort of my scene, And I come down here and I spent about 2 hours down here, got terribly bored with the whole situation, and thought, well, I was glad when I go home. And then a few weeks later, I decided to come down again. I've been coming down ever since. And that was 1969.
That's it, lads. OK, tea break now.
Tea breaks offer the voluntary workforce of members the opportunity to swap stories and progress reports. Work weeks are special events to encourage members to get down to some hard graft. At weekends and steam days, visitors take priority. Part of the Society's rolling stock collection are these super saloons.
These coaches were built in 1932 and they put this kitchen in Princess Elizabeth in 1936. This is one of 3 ocean saloons at the Didcot Railway Centre. The third one, Prince of Wales, is undergoing restoration so that we can actually join it to this fleet. We have 58 diners coming for dinner this evening and we run our wine and dines once a month from April to October. They're usually quite full and people like to go somewhere different to eat, so we tend to find people who enjoy the visit round the Railway Museum and then coming and dine in the coaches.
Although at every turn an engine can be seen puffing away on its business, part of the Society's preservation philosophy is to recreate the total environment of the great days of steam. Flora and fauna are actively encouraged in Didcot's nature conservation area, where over 200 species of wild flowers bloom. But another greater blossoming is recorded here at the Great Western Society's Museum, the blossoming of God's wonderful railway. The practicalities of operating such a busy marshalling yard are immense, and items such as a turntable become invaluable. Unfortunately, British Rail took their turntable with them when they left. But eventually the Society did find one, rusting, at Southampton docks. The 70-foot iron turntable was transported, renovated and reassembled at Didcot over a 2-year period. Much of the day-to-day positioning of engines and carriages revolves around this giant feat of engineering that enables only 2 men to rotate over 80 tons of locomotive, coal and water at the turn of a handle.
This engine, Burton Agnes Hall, was built at Swindon 1949, was used on the Western region on mixed traffic trains, and was the last steam locomotive running on the British Rail Western region, and was bought by us direct from British Rail after working a train from Oxford to Banbury, and we actually bought the engine in Banbury sheds on the 3rd of January 1966. It's been here for that entire period. We've done one complete overhaul on it when it was returned to traffic last year, and we are running mainline trains with it this year, of which there's a train out in a few weeks' time.
It was a sunnier day when a well-known and much-loved visitor to the celebrations was the LMS Princess Elizabeth. The Princess Elizabeth is one of the fastest express engines that ran between London and Scotland in the heyday of steam. Another welcome visitor from the Bulmers Railway Centre in Hereford was the King George V. The King George put on a really royal show. But all too soon, preparations were made for the engine's return. Guest appearances are no stranger to the King George. This giant bell on the front of the locomotive commemorates an incredible feat when the whole engine was shipped to the United States to take part in the Baltimore and Ohio Railway Centenary celebrations in 1927. But back to today, and the King George setting off for a major refit on what is likely to be its last run out on the main line ever. Well, here's to the first 20 years at Didcot. And here's to the next 20. But it's not over yet. For even at night, there's an opportunity for enthusiasts to get steam in their sights.